Welcome. In this installment of animation, we are going to be looking at doing some pose-to-pose, frame-by-frame animation. So that'll make more sense as we get into it. But a little bit of housekeeping first. One of the things we want to do is to go into our preferences, which on the Mac is under the Harmony menu. On Windows, you will find it under the Edit pull-down menu. And what we need is we need it to focus on mouse enter. So by default, that's not checked. It's important that that is checked because anytime we use any type of keyboard shortcut, that keyboard shortcut is tied to what is the active window. So if we want to zoom, we use the numbers 1 or 2 on the keyboard, and it will zoom based on which is the active window. So we need to pay attention to what is the active window. So if I now see this red frame around my timeline, that tells me that down here is the active window. Here it's now my camera window, there's my tool properties, color. So if the active window is here and now I hit 2, it zooms in or zooms out on the keyboard. Same thing when I'm in my camera view, zoom in, zoom out. So we're able to do all of this based on where that active window is. So I am going to click on frame 1 here, and what I want to do is rename this layer. This layer will be my ground. So our housekeeping was to take on focus on mouse enter. Now what we want to do is add some more layers. So to do that, I can click on the little icon with the red, blue, and yellow dots, which are actually a triangle, circle, square, if you could zoom in and see it. And we're going to add some layers. So what I want to do, I have my ground. I'm going to add a layer for the path of my animation. So I'm going to trace out the path that I want to animate on. It will make it easier as we start to try to understand timing and anticipation and squash and stretch. So there's a number of different animation principles that will be at work as we go through our practice today. So I'm going to do that now. If I just click add, it adds it, or if I hit return or enter on the keyboard, we can see how it adds it, and I can keep adding layers here. So the next thing I want to do, so I have the ground, I have my path, now I want to add a rough layer. This is where I'm going to rough in my animation. And finally, I have my final art that I'm going to add, and this is going to be my sack layer that I will be adding. It's the last one, so I will click add and close. So now we have the different layers that we're going to work on. So I'm going to extend out my timeline because I know I eventually will want it longer, so I might as well extend it out. Going back to the ground layer, I am going to, using the pencil tool, you can also use the brush tool right now. We're not too concerned about lines, making pencil lines versus paint strokes, because that really comes into play when we start dealing with riggings on characters. If we're not rigging our characters, that's less important. But when we start dealing with rigged characters, then we have to pay attention to whether we have lines or paint strokes, because when we try to composite multiple layers together, such as in an articulation for an arm or a leg, or where the shoulder meets the torso, those kinds of parts, we're able to get different blending of those lines when we use the pencil tool versus the paintbrush tool. So they work differently. And over time we will come to understand them. So I'm just going to create a line. This will be my ground that I'm working on. Now, I'm going to create the path I want my animation to follow. And for the purposes of this learning activity, I'm going to demonstrate using a very simple kind of bouncing path. So I'm going to just have an arc, and I'm going to have a second arc with it. You could have more arcs if you wanted, but that's all I'm going to start with right now. One thing, I turned it on because it's often there while I'm working. It's called the light table. So what the light table is, if I click on that, go to a new layer, we'll see how the other layers grade themselves out. So light table is really useful so you can tell which is your active layer when you're working, so that if I'm on the ground, we can see ground is darker, my path is grayed out. If I go to path, path is darker, ground is grayed out. Now if I go to my rough layer, they're both grayed out. Now, I'm not done with the path yet. I want to add a little bit more to it. So if this is the path I'm following, this is going to be my starting position here. And then midway through this jump, I'm going to be at that point. Then I will be at the other end. Then I will jump again. And then finally at the end of my arc. Now, when we're working, what's useful is to think about as we jump. As we're doing this jump, we have the force of gravity pushing downward, because whenever we're animating, we're always trying to think about how do we impart a sense of reality, of lifelike quality to it. And we do that by addressing the real world within our animation. In the real world, we have gravity. So when you jump and you go up, so when you're going up, that gravity is always pulling downward on you. It's pulling downward, pulling down. So that's why we don't just keep going up and up and up. So as we jump, we start topping out. We reach our high point and then we come down. Now, when we do this, as we start getting closer to that high point, we start slowing down. So a way that we can plan for that is I start dividing my animation in half. So halfway between here and here, I'll be right there. Now we're going to have that distance again, and I'll have that distance again. So we'll have this distance, because as we reach that top, we start moving less per frame. So we move a lot, then a little, less, and then we're on that less movement, more movement, more movement, more movement, as that gravity is once again pushing downward on us. And now when we go up for our second bounce, we can have it again, and have it again. So each of these hash marks represents a point in time that we're going to want to focus in our animation. Now we're going to need a few extra frames down at the bottom points, because when we start, we need to build in some anticipation. So we're going to have to change our artwork to create the impression that we are building up that energy to be able to launch up into the air. So we'll be figuring out how to do that. But having this path with these marks on here is going to give us help. It's going to give us a guide. Just going to get rid of that. So use the select tool. I can highlight it, hit delete on the keyboard. Those go away just because I don't want them there later. Now if we notice, the ground and my path only exists on frame 1, so we are going to want to extend that out. Easy way to do that is to just click in the final 2 frames of those 2 layers, and using the function key F5, it extends out my exposure. So memorizing a couple keyboard shortcuts is going to greatly improve your productivity when you're working, so you do want to do that. Otherwise, let's see, if I right click and go under exposure, then we can increase exposure. We can set exposure to a specific number. So we have a number of options, and we will be using this exposure window later. We can just extend exposure and specify how many frames we want to extend something. F5 is just a whole lot easier than trying to find it on a menu. So do yourself a favor and master F5. Going back to my rough layer, this is where I'm going to start planning out my animation to figure out how I want it to go. So I'll grab my pencil tool, and I'm going to just start out with my basic kind of a sack shape that I can always go and add more finesse to later. Now if I move up or move over to my next frame, I want to see what's there, so I'm going to turn on onion skinning so I can see the previous sack. So when I'm at, well, I like thinking of my sack where it almost has legs. The key thing that we're going to be working for here as we're doing squash and stretch and planning out our pose to pose animation is you want to think in terms of consistency of volume. So squash and stretch works that you can stretch things really far, but if we take the same object and stretch it out, we want to think in terms of it would be a similar volume. So these two objects are similar in volume. Might want to skinny it up a little bit. Let's see, there's my eraser. I think I went too skinny there. But we're trying to maintain that overall sense of volume so that if we have the first sack, second sack, and maybe I want to stretch, we're trying to make it seem somewhat realistic. We can exaggerate, but what we don't want is we wouldn't want to go, hey, look, I've stretched that far and it's the same object. Nobody's going to be convinced that these two are the same object. If we need it to be that long, then it's probably going to have to really be stretched thin as part of that. So we would need to really stretch it long. So when we're doing squash and stretch and trying to create that sense of reality, we're always trying to think in terms of how we can maintain that sense of volume. Now when we get to this next point in time, right here, this is where we've come down. So we're going to be, should be a fairly similar shape. Now, because this is frame by frame, we can let we don't have to have it 100% on our model. I could copy paste between that, and I mean, to do that, it's important, and again, this is where focus on mouse enter, what window is active is going to affect what we're copying. So when we're trying to copy artwork and reuse it from frame to frame, we don't want to be anywhere near the timeline. We have to be in the camera or the drawing view. So now if I were to grab my selection arrow here and select that, so I just drag around it to select it, if I copy that and now move to an empty frame, and while this window is active, got to make sure I'm not here, but up here, I paste. We can see it pasted it in, and then I could move that over to here. And now that I've done that, I used flip inside my tool properties because I wanted it to kind of be the opposite. Oh, I forgot I want to top one up there. So what I can do is just drag this over, go to that empty frame, and click on Insert New Drawing. So create empty drawing. So now if we look here, we have a drawing of nothing. Go back to here, select that. Again, camera window is active. Copy that, move over to my empty frame. Camera window is active. Paste, drag over, so now we're in our timeline. So we can see we have the poses here. Now if I want to see more, I can click this little plus on keyframe, on onion skinning, and then that extends out that arrow so we can see what's there. Now here, if I'm at the beginning and want to see all the way to the end, I can click the green plus. So that allows us to see those frames. So we can see what is going on. Now, if, put stop, and if I hit play on this, we'll see it's going way, way, way too fast. So that means we need some more drawings to work this out. So I know that I'm going to need at least one drawing for each one of my hash marks as I try to work out this animation and figure out what is happening with it. So these drawings that are immediately following the ground points should be showing a lot of kind of dynamic change in my artwork. So what I need to do is I need to create an empty frame in between. And like everything on computers, there's a lot of different ways to go about doing that. Now, what I can do is I can highlight, shift click these frames, I can move them over, and we'll see how now there's 2 frames showing for that one. That's fine. And then I can say insert an empty drawing, and let me go grab my pencil tool, and now I'm going to, so viewing that, we kind of have legs on our sack, and it launched, the back leg is trailing with it, so it's stretching. So we can see we're stretching to here, and now I need to move it out. And this kind of dragging of frames and all of that's probably going to get a little bit unwieldy by the time we start. I mean, eventually we'll have probably, just in the simple double bounce, 30 or 40 different pieces that we're playing with, so this isn't going to work really well. So what works better is having our cursor over the timeline, and I hit the plus key. So if I have a numeric keypad, I can hit plus. If I have a laptop without the numeric keypad on it, I hold down the shift key and then I hit plus because it's over equals, because I'm trying to get that plus character. And you'll see when I did that, it extended that out. With it extended out, I have my high point, and now I can move to my next frame because I want to create the next frame after it. So I always extend it out 1 and move to that additional frame created and say insert new drawing. We can see now it grays it out, and now I am ready to insert my next drawing. And again, thinking in terms of, this is almost like a body with legs, each bottom is a leg. I'm reaching down to the ground as I'm moving through space. So then that gives me that motion. Now, moving up, we're going to add 2 more, then we're going to do some more adjustments to our timing. So from the bottom here, I want to extend this out to create that middle in between frame. So again, I make sure that my timeline is active and hit plus, move to the next frame, insert new drawing, and now this time I'm going to insert that new drawing as part of it. Now this time I'm viewing it's not quite as dramatic as the previous one because it's a smaller bounce, so it's probably not going to have as dramatic a movement. So again, I want to add a drawing after this, so with this active, plus on the keyboard, and I have to make sure that I hit plus and nothing happened because I was still over the drawing window or camera window. I need to move it into the timeline. Got my new frame, insert that next drawing, and this time, and if you don't like your drawings, you can tweak or adjust them. Remembering that, yeah, this is our rough drawing layer. This is not our final artwork that we will then draw over the top. So hitting play, you can see how it's starting to create some resemblance to actual animation. What I really want to see happen now is some anticipation. I want this to somehow get from frame 1 to frame 2. But we have a core of our movement happening, but we need to think about, okay, how do I do this? Just like a baseball pitcher has to wind up, they draw back before they throw the ball forward. Our sack here needs to wind up before it can launch into the air. So that means it will need to compress itself to the ground to build up that potential energy to launch upright. So we need to figure out that. Then when we continue our arc and hit the ground, we're going to want to then splat out on the ground, stretching out, showing how when we hit that ground we squash into it. So we have stretch frames going on, but we don't really have any squash happening yet. And we use that squash to build energy, but also to absorb energy that can then get redirected for that next jump. So once again, I'm over my timeline. And I simply hit plus, go to that next frame, insert empty drawing, and this time, so from my starting position, because I know I'm going up, I want to squish it down. Oh, had the eraser. I'm like, why isn't my line working? So kind of leaning backward, because I'm leaning backward as part of my anticipation. Now, anticipation is something that can take 1, 2, 3. It can take a number of frames as you think about how you want to build up that energy with it. So if I want to extend this out, plus, move to that next frame, insert a new drawing, and now so we've really kind of bent it down. And then the next frame, this is where I want it to be pretty dramatic. I'm going to, again, plus, move to the next drawing, insert empty drawing, and this time I am going to, I don't like that line. Really stretch out and try not to hit undo on it while I'm doing that. Grab the eraser, change the shape a little bit, put in a stop point and hit play. You can see how it's starting to launch. I even want to, on this next frame, I'm going to just move that so I'm even off the ground a little bit. So it's really starting to get some launch. And we're going to have to add in some of those extra frames there. But let's work on the squash happening when we hit the ground. So from here, we're coming in from a pretty high point. So plus, move to the next frame, insert empty drawing, and this time when I come across, I'm going to really thinking about, I'm hitting almost, and really distorting my body as part of it. So we hit, then we return back to our normal form and launch back up. Now let's go from here, once again, plus, oh, gotta be over the correct thing. I was still sitting over the camera window and I hit plus and nothing happened, so I move back to the timeline. I got plus, insert a new drawing, and this time this is where we want to create that movement. Now, new stop point, hit play. It's going really fast at the moment, and that's okay because we're going to extend the exposure of these in a little while, but I find it's easier right now to add these drawings in as needed. and then we'll start slowing it down, and then we can decide on some of them if we want them to be longer exposure or shorter exposure. So we need to, from here, we need to add the in-between drawing to there, so we're going to end up with 2. So first, I'm over the timeline, plus, move to the next frame, insert new drawing. So I'm creating a basic shape, plus, new frame, drawing, and this time we're going to be pretty close to that finished artwork. Now, let's increase our stop point there. Let's run this. So we can see how it's starting to really take shape. But we notice from here to here, it doesn't follow the arc, it goes in a straight line because we don't have those drawings in between. So we need to add those once more. So plus, next frame, empty drawing, insert that drawing, plus, move over, to frame. I might end up wanting to extend that out a little bit, make it a little bit more dramatic. So let's go find where. There. I think I want to grow that one a little bit more to get a little more movement with it. And if we find that this is too harsh down here, we might end up adding something in between those two as well. We'll see what the timing works out to be, but let's add some more timing in to finish out this one as well, because we need 4 more drawings to happen here. So once again, plus, click to the next frame, empty drawing, switch back to the pencil so I'm not using the eraser all over the timeline, plus, go to that next drawing, insert an empty, then we have here, plus, go to that next drawing, insert, plus, next spot, insert, I think that drawing needs to be a little bit bigger, because looking at the two, as I feel like we lost a little bit of size on it. So we're trying to maintain overall size. And now we might end up needing a few frames to settle the animation here, but still, let's just take a look at what we have, and we hit play. We can see how now it's really starting to take shape as an animation. Now if I turn off the path, it really is starting to shape up. Once again, with these drawings, if I select them, if I right click, you can choose exposure, set exposure to 2. We can also find it under the animation drop down menu, cell, set exposure to, and we can choose what to set it to, which apparently right click, set exposure to 2. I'll change my endpoint to stop. Now, the first bounce looks pretty good. The second one is starting to feel a little bit too slow on some of those that I think I want to adjust that exposure. Let me just turn path back on. So I feel like I want to adjust the exposure from here. So I want to make this less, so the same way that plus makes it longer, minus will shorten it. So I'm going to shorten that one. I'm going to shorten that one. I'm going to shorten this one. So it's a little bit shorter while it goes up. I'm going to hold 2 at the top. I'm going to hold 2 on that one, and then I will shorten that one. I'm going to shorten this one. And let's see. Let's start put in a new stop and find out. All right, that feels a little bit better. So when we're doing this, we don't always have our animation set on 2s. Now, when we're doing keyframe animation, which we will be exploring in our next module, that means we will be, at the end of the process, converting all of our animation to having keyframes every 2 frames. So that's part of how you finish what you're doing. But as you create it, because we're allowing the computer to help us do some of the animation, we're doing what's called tweening, where the computer figures out how to animate in between our key poses. And when it does that, at the very end, we convert everything so it's exposed for exactly 2 frames. But when we're doing our basic animation like this, sometimes we'll want it to be on 2s, sometimes we'll want it to be on 1. So as I look here, I'm going to just turn off onion skinning so I can figure out which frame I'm looking at easier. So down as part of my anticipation. Okay, I like that. I'm going to shorten this frame up. So we'll shorten that one up, this one. Let those stay on 2s. Leave that on 2. I'm going to shorten this one to 1. Put in a, actually I'm not going to put in my stop point there. I'm going to take this and I'm going to extend that out so when the animation finishes it has just a few more frames so it holds on that. So I'm setting a hold. Now let's watch what happens. Now I feel like at the very end here it's a little too much of a snap back to that, so I need something in between. Where I like the beginning where it kind of leans back and launches, though I almost feel that I can extend this out for another frame and extend that for another frame as well. Let's see what we look like here. I like that better. That I almost feel like I could do an in-between drawing between these as well. So I'm going to add a new drawing. Let's turn back on onion skinning. And now with this drawing, I am going to create that in-between and take and extend out their exposures. And this is, sometimes we have to add in these extra drawings to smooth out the animation, because I find right here that's not, we need something in between those two. So I'll just go right here, insert that empty drawing, extend this one out. I'll extend that out, but now this drawing in between, you have the bottom, oh, actually what I want is I want it to kind of, it's almost kind of jelloing up a little bit so we can see how it's So we're here, up, and then it settles back into its final form. And if I add in another drawing here, in between, I'm going to just have it so we get a little kind of wiggle going on, and then I want to go back to that drawing. Now, how do I find that? I want to find this drawing. So I can create an empty and copy paste, but if I know I'm returning to that actual drawing, turns out every drawing that we've made lives in our library. So you can pull up your library window. It's easier to find it even under our drawing substitutions. So I click plus and we'll find drawing substitutions. I've added it to my window, and we can now see where we have our drawing substitutions window. Now, I seem to remember that this drawing was one of the very early ones we made, so it's probably earlier on that list. Because we're here, so we squish, bounce up, going to come to my final form, I'll bounce to that other form, and now I want to return right here to that next drawing. So now we want to set that up as that next drawing. So to do that, I just deleted what was there. So we're here. So we have this, this, that. Now, when I said you could copy paste, I can copy paste, and notice how this drawing turns out that's number 4 on the list. If I go here, that's number 21. So we can see how each one of these exists as something. So that's number 4. So if I'm on an empty frame where it says no exposure, if I just choose 4, it puts it in. But I could also, if I go here, and that's number 4, and now I'm in my timeline, if I copy, Command or Control C, then go to this empty frame and paste, it pastes in drawing 4. So remember what I said earlier in this lecture, that the active window is when you copy paste going to make a difference. If I copy paste the lines, the actual things that I've drawn, and paste that into an empty frame, that creates a new drawing. So it'd be a new drawing on the list. If I copy in my timeline, it just copies which drawing, which one of these drawings is being shown to me. So I know it can be a little bit confusing, but so we're here, here, there. I'm just going to extend all of these out to 2s and see. Oh. And I don't want that one shown anymore. I just want this one extending out. Let's set a new stop point and hit play and see. So it's got a little wiggle. I think the wiggle might be a little too dramatic. So I'm going to change that a little bit. And let's see. So I think the wiggle's too much on that. So what I'm going to do is select all of this. Notice I'm in my camera window. Delete. Now if I go here, I'm going to copy that. Move to that empty frame. I'm going to paste that. And with these controls, I can just... well, actually, I didn't want to do that just yet. See, we paste it in. Now with these controls, I'm going to zoom in so you can see. What I can do is I can squish it, so it's like adjusting, pulling it out. But if I take this little center point and move it down, now if I pull this down, we notice the bottom didn't move. It just stretched it. It anchored it at that point. Now, if I put this on this side over here and stretch, it pulls out a little bit. If I put this on this side and stretch, pulls it out a little bit. So now, if we compare that, before, after, which probably, when I said I didn't want to do as much, I think I just did too much. So I'm just going to delete that, paste it back in. And let's copy again. All right, I lost track of where I was by adjusting things. So this is the frame I like. Copy that. Move to this next frame. Whoop. Delete, paste. Okay, now it pasted it back into the same spot. This time, I'll just pull this down. Just do a little stretch down. I'll stretch out. I'll stretch out. Yeah, so we just get that little wiggle. All right, now zoom back out. So we get that little bit of jelly quality to it, just a little bit of wiggle. Looks like we could probably stand to have an additional drawing or two right when it hits the ground. Because it's happening so fast. So I almost need something in between this one and the next one. So I'm going to extend this out and create that empty drawing in between. See if that gives me a little like that better. Okay. So, a couple things that we've looked at. Focus on mouse enter, very important. It makes it much easier. Otherwise, you have to click on something inside that frame to make it the active window. That's just really not fun, having to click on things everywhere you go. Second, we set up a guide that we are using for our animation so we can see what is there. Then we're using plus and minus on the keyboard inside the timeline to add or subtract from our overall exposure to adjust our timing. Once we extend something out, we add in an empty drawing. Create empty drawing. On the Mac, Option Shift R, Windows probably Alt Shift R, and then that would allow you to add that additional drawing. Once you add that drawing, then you create the artwork for it. If you know you need to recycle something or you're trying to find something you've used before, pull up your drawing substitutions. You can see it, or you can pull up your drawing library and you'll see how it's cycling through those different drawings. It does not matter that they're out of order. We don't need these drawings in our drawing substitutions to be in the order they appear on the timeline. When we're doing frame by frame, that does not matter. So now that I have my animation roughed, the next thing for me to do would be to now move to a new layer to set my pencil or brush, whatever I'm going to do my finished artwork with, to my perfect size so I can make it bigger or smaller or whatever I'm trying to do, and to then very carefully start creating finished artwork on top of what I have here. So that usually means I want to zoom in a little bit so I can better see what it is that I am drawing. Now, one thing that you can do that makes drawing easier is you can rotate your animation wheel so that you're moving your hand or mouse in the direction that is most natural or comfortable. So on the Mac it's Command Option, on Windows Control Alt. Oh, I keep thinking I'm switching back and I don't. But it allows you to position your animation wheel in the orientation that is most comfortable for you. And now that I just did this, what I really want to do is I want to do my finished artwork in a new color. I don't want black lines, so I'm going to choose a different color. I want to go for this dark purple. So if I select everything and choose that, it now turns it to that next color. Now if I move to my next frame, hold down spacebar, I can center it where my hand is comfortable. Control Alt or Command Option, rotate it, and now I can create my lines in the direction that is most comfortable. If I need to reset, Shift M will reset my view. So if I'm struggling with how do I reset the view that I'm working on, Shift M if you get totally lost. So you've spun it all around, you've zoomed in too far, and you're like, I don't know what's going on. Shift M brings it back. Alright, so now let me get to that next frame. I'm on this frame, so space allows me to drag it so it's centered, and 2 will zoom it in a little bit, and I'm going to rotate it while I'm working here. So that I can get, if I don't like my line, I can reset that line. Now I move to my next view. Right. Oh. I was looking for something higher and I thought I was already moving up. I forgot we added that additional view over here, so rotate, center it. Reset it. Move to that next. So it just becomes a matter of rinse and repeat. Work your way across your drawing and create the artwork that you need until you're happy with the result. Do remember that you will want to draw a background layer, or you will wish to insert a color card so that we have a background with your project, otherwise we won't be able to see it. Turn off the path when you are done with your animation or planning out your animation, because we don't need that in the finished product. So two things that I need to point out at the end of the video here is, for my color, I did choose to do a gradient color instead of solid color for my fill, just for a little bit of fun. I just wanted something different, so you can choose your two colors that way. I am in the multi-wheel mode. I prefer that, but it looks, here's the single, the default setting, where you have solid colors. Whoop. Or gradient. So, well, good, I'm glad it remembered it. All right, and now we can see, I just like the multi-wheel mode. Second is a quick preview that you can do to preview your video is you hit render and play. If you've done it before, I'll prompt you. Some of these frames have been rendered. You want to do it again? Sure, because now I might have new artwork. It renders out between your start and stop point, which is nice. So it doesn't render your entire timeline, so if you just want to see a small section rendered out, then that's a nice way that you can go about doing that. And then I'd like to turn on loop on it, so then when I hit play I can see what it looks like. So that's a convenient way to take a look at it while you are working. And while it's playing, we can zoom in or out, so I can zoom in, make it a little bit bigger if I so desire. I think that might be too big. No, it pretty much fits. So we can see it that way. Otherwise, I like that a little bit better, so it fits on screen and I can see it in its entirety. This is a convenient way to animate, remembering that we set up a path to follow. We set up a guideline to establish easing. Notice we divided in half, divide in half, divide in half. So we ease into this finish. So I'm easing into this finish, and then we're easing out of the high point. So easing out, short way to think about ease in and ease out is we're easing out of the gate and we're easing into the finish. So that is the correct terminology for ease in and ease out. So we're easing into this high point, we're easing out of it as we move to that next bounce point. And then we're easing into the high point, easing out to that finish. We've established a little bit of anticipation to get that launch, to hit that high point, coming down, squash and stretch. So we have squash and stretch happening with our sack-like object. If you're lacking in motivation, go online, go look up sack animation, and you'll find countless examples of sack, rug, or other flour sack, where you're trying to take an inanimate, squishy object and giving it some resemblance of life. This is a fantastic exercise for every animator to do. It's a good thing to explore anytime you have a new tool that you're working with. Just try and get an understanding of how this tool works and how it's going to work for you in your animation.